As a pork evangelist, I often will get asked, Pork Rhyne, I'm raising pigs for my homestead or for my self-sufficient farm, and I really want to transition to actually making money raising pigs out on pasture. There's some things you need to be thinking about when it comes to breeding, selecting the right breed, figuring out what markets to sell in, and also figuring out how much things cost and how to price things out. So in this interview, we're going to have a conversation about all those things. If you don't know who I am, I'm Pork Rhyne, the pork evangelist. I'm an award-winning international agricultural educator and agribusiness coach. My whole passion in life is to make sure that farmers and any other agripreneur really overcome their fears when it comes to branding, marketing, and running a business for profitability. So if you're interested in being able to have pigs for your farm and turning it into an actual farm business where you make money and where you're being of support to your community, this will be a perfect interview that you kind of dive in and dig deep on. Once you do that, definitely check out my friend Mona and her Homesteading Income Plan Facebook page, where she's going to have some of my content and content of many others as well. Stay tuned.
Welcome to our training with Pork Rhyne. We are going to talk about all things pigs today. Thank you, Pork Rhyne, for coming. And I really appreciate this because you are just doing this out of the goodness of your heart. Like you don't, where w- this group is free for people, but I'm just so thankful that there are people willing to do this for other people because it is a big pain point. Homestead income is a big pain point. It's not talked about enough. And I feel like there's not enough. Let's just get it done. Let's just figure out how to generate an income that makes your homestead sustainable. Everyone from beginners to longtime homesteaders. The first question I'm going to ask him is a little bit about his story. But if you want to know more about his story, please listen to the Homesteading for Beginners podcast, episodes 60 and 61. And he really gets into the why he decided to go with pigs, why pigs came into his world. And it's a really neat story about one pig in particular. So go listen to those things and you can learn more. Plus, there will be other things that he covers in that episode, including coaching me on whether I want pigs, which is very interesting. It was a really great conversation. So let's start by briefly telling us about you, where you are currently, and a little bit about your story.
Thank you for the question. And first of all, thank you for even having me on here. Grateful to be of service today. So, yeah, normally people will ask me, hey, who am I? Instead of saying, hi, my name's Ryan, I say, hi, my name's Pork Ryan, the pork evangelist. And off the top, people are like, pork who? The what? A what? So when they ask me, what do you do? Because they're usually curious after that, I tell people that I help farmers overcome their fears and failures. And so that usually gets people attention. But part of how I do that is I help farmers and homesteaders really figure out not just how to brand their farmstead, not just how to market themselves and their business, not even the production methodology in that. I help them realize that a lot of the disconnect that we have in our pricing and lack of efficiency of scale oftentimes comes from a point of fear. Normally, I'll get people who'll say, oh, no one will buy my products. Or I'll ask them, why are your prices so low? And they'll say, I'm just starting out and I'm getting new. And I'm like, no, BS. No, you're not. No, you're not. Not one bit. And so we have deeper conversations that go beyond just the marketing and the branding and goes into, man, the reason why I don't price myself is because I'm afraid of failure. And then we start talking about childhood stuff. So it's just really amazing. I feel really blessed to be able to have the space to help people not just become profitable, which is fun, it's great. But at the end of the day, you can have all the money in the world. But if you lose your family, what's the point? We got to talk about money and financing and making an income on the homestead. And I met homesteaders who money was such a big issue that it helped lead to a divorce. It didn't cause a divorce. Divorce was caused by lack of communication, a lack of values, and a lack of vision. But being able to understand and align both financially with everything else really helps people unify rather than divide. And so grateful I get to be of service to that as well. So looking forward to the conversation today. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. And you're so right. Like money is such a big pain point for a lot of people, but homesteaders, I feel especially because there's a lot at stake and animals die, whole crops fail and things like that can happen. And if we're not planning ahead for those moments of failure and having a pivoting plan or whatever, or just having a good plan to start with, then lots of things can happen, including marital problems and all sorts of things, because then there's blame and that sort of thing. So, yes, you have this is much deeper that conversation than just pigs. Okay. It really goes deep. I talk a lot about on the podcast, like self-sufficiency is great and all, but you can't do anything without the community. Like things don't work without community. So there needs to be community dependency as well as learning self-sufficiency skills. So Ellen asked, what are the best breeds for getting started when you're getting started? This is probably a very
Oh,
common question for you, right?
oh man. It's like everywhere I go, I've been speaking all over the place, and that question's always there. What's the best breed of pig? And Ellen, what I'll say to you is the best breed of pig is a pig that works best for you. Everyone has different needs. And in the podcast interview that we did, definitely go back to that for reference. I explained that in more detail. I'll keep it brief here. Really, it's understanding what are your needs. So if we're talking a little bit about income, it's not just what are your needs, it's now what are your customers' needs going to be as well, on top of your needs. And so really figuring out how much volume of meat do you want? What texture of meat do you want? How big is the land that you have? What type of land do you have? How much time do you have in order to farm and operate? There are some breeds that take a little bit more love and care. There are other breeds that are somewhat sufficient with little input, but you get different results out of those. So it really just depends on what your end goals are. And then out of your end goals, which one do you prioritize more? For some people, having a breed that is just easygoing is great, but they really need a high productive pig that's going to produce a lot of pork, which might mean they need to think about maybe getting a breed that is a little more high maintenance in order to get the result that they really want, which is more volume of meat or pork. So those are just some things you want to think about is how much time do I have? How much land do I have? How much capital resource do I have? What's my labor force look like? How many pigs do I need? And then from there, you can get a pretty good idea. But again, I go more in depth in that in the interview that Mona did with me a couple weeks ago. Definitely check out that interview.
Yeah, you mentioned specific breeds in that interview, so that would be a good one for you, and I'll link it in the group as well. What are the most common ways people raise pig as an income source?
Generally, the way that people are going to raise pigs for income is usually through raw meat sales. So this would include wholes and halves, meaning selling the whole animal, not turning it into retail cuts for yourself and then reselling it, but literally raising a pig for somebody. You bring the pig to the butcher, and then they'll process it, and then the customer picks up the animal in whatever cuts that they wanted it to be in. So that'll be whole and half sales. It's very common. It that form of production is less profitable per pig. The ease of it is that you have the opportunity to get rid of all the pig in one go. That which means you don't have to worry about freezer space. You don't have to worry about products lingering for months, if not years. So that's another good thing. It all just goes to the customer and they do whatever they want with it. Option number two, which creates a little bit more profitability, is retail cuts. So this is getting a pig, looking at a cut sheet, getting particular cuts that you want, like bacon, pork chops, different types of sausages, getting the meat back, and then selling it. Generally, you make a lot more money because it's a premium price, and you're making a lot more money per cut than you would if you were to just sell the whole thing to a customer individually. That's one thing to keep in mind is generally, if you want to make the most bang for your buck when it comes to simply profitability and money, doing retail cuts is going to be your best bet. There are other options like a CSA option where it's not necessarily just selling individual retail cuts at the farmer's market. And it's also not necessarily selling whole and half sales of a pig. So with a CSA model, which is community supported agriculture. Generally, what you do is a subscription box. And every month, a customer pays a subscription. Maybe it's not every month, maybe it's every 3 months. Usually, a monthly subscription keeps people engaged with you and they don't forget about you as often. So, I usually recommend a monthly subscription box. And then you just set a price for that. Maybe it's $50 a box. And they pay that every month and they get an X amount of pounds of meat through that. There are options in that where you can either say, "Oh, with this month's CSA box, we're going to have Italian sausage with 1 pound of bacon, with 2 pounds of pork chop. And then next week, it might be blueberry breakfast sausage." That is a thing. I have people who are doing that. Blueberry breakfast sausage. You want to get people excited, find weird flavors that your processor will be able to do. So again, those are some options that you can do. Either whole and half sales, which you get rid of the pig instantaneously once it's ready. Selling individual retail cuts, which usually you'll be selling at like a farmer's market. So that's an option. And then you make a little bit more money that way. And then a CSA subscription model where you sell in the middle, you sell bulk quantities, but they're not as big as selling the whole animal in one go. And also you're creating that consistent reminder that the customer is almost reliant and dependent on their needs for meat coming from you directly. So that's something to think about. And there are other options out there, but
Right.
that's the main way that people are doing it. And I love to talk about the other options to making more money outside of that.
That was great. I love that. So we'll move on to the next question since we have a lot. It's from Luke, which was, what's the standard charge per pound? Is it charged by green weight or hanging weight?
So with live weight versus hanging weight, generally, if you're thinking even of live weight, hanging weight, you're selling whole and half carcasses. So that's one particular model that would not necessarily include a CSA model or retail cut model, selling those individually. That's strictly for wholes and halves. In terms of what price, it really depends on what your expenses are. So you always want to start with what your expenses are first. You can look at other farmers' prices and then mimic their pricing, but I don't recommend doing that. And here's why. A lot of farmers, myself as a consultant, they don't necessarily make the best business people. And so they might put a price because they're trying to copy everyone else, like the inclination that you might want to have. And so being able to say, you know what, I'm just going to look at what my expenses are and then what my profit should be from that. So a price is not just expenses. Price is expenses, overhead, stuff like that, plus a profit margin. Some people use a percentage profit margin. Some people use just a dollar amount. It depends on what you want to do. That's up to you. But generally, it depends on your area. So we have a very huge country with 50 states, and the pricing differs even within the state itself. So one resource is actually looking at the USDA. The USDA comes up with a report either once a month or quarterly, and it's like a niche meat report. You can look that up, and it will show you in your state what the niche meat report looks like for that. That not only goes through like whole and half sales, how much people are usually charging, it also will do cuts. Average farmers are charging, let's say, $10 a pound for a pork chop, just random number. But I also give the range. Some people are selling at $7. Some people are selling at $15. You might be in the middle. You might be a little bit above. You might be a little bit below. So it also depends on what market you're going to sell into. Are you just selling to friends and family that are just going to stickle you if you have a premium price for it? Or are you going to sell to a bougie restaurant? Or are you going to sell to a bougie neighborhood? So these are things that you want to consider. I think what I have noticed is that the average price from my experience or range can be as low as $7 a pound. And this is retail cuts, $7 a pound all the way up to $25 a pound. It just depends on the cut. Bacon's going to be more expensive than ground pork. It just is. So figure out first what your expenses are, and I'll help you get a better idea of what you should be charging for your pig. And that's something that I'll have to do like a YouTube course on my YouTube channel to help people figure out certain pricing. We can go over that in a different video. So looking forward to that too.
Yeah, that is great. And there's a follow-up question I think Luke had also asked is, what percentage of hanging weight actually comes back after processing?
Mm, Also depends. So for full disclosure, like my tagline is wisdom without the hogwash. I don't usually give specific numbers. And the reason why is because everyone's context is so different that the numbers will actually mess you up if I give you a particular number, if it doesn't fit your context. So I'm going to try to help develop critical thinking skills rather than just giving a simple number that may not actually serve you well. So when it comes to hanging weight and what you want to get back, usually somewhere around 50%, a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, you'll get back. And that's generally if you're doing the general cuts, which include bacon, pork chops, and you're utilizing the rest of the sausage. If you're utilizing also bones and getting back kidneys, hearts, even the head and other offal products, you'll get more yield back. The issue with that is figuring out how to sell that. And I know that's another question. So I'll make sure they answer that later. But yeah, generally around 50% if you're doing regular cuts. And that's pretty good. So if you're doing let's say you take a pig and it's 300 pounds. Cool. You can expect somewhere around 150 pounds back. If you're taking back bones as well, you'll be getting more of a yield in that. And there's a way of finessing that. There are people who are interested in soup bones, interested in dog treats through bones. That's another option. There are people who are also part of the raw group where they're feeding their animals raw products. So having raw bones can be helpful for them as well. So it also just depends on your market. Sometimes it's not worth holding on to that extra stuff if you don't have a market for it. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
So let's go to the next question. Keith asked, is it best to butcher your own pigs, sell parts? Is there anything else you want to tell him about is it best to butcher your own or like any insight you want to give him?
Yeah, and it depends on context. Again, wisdom without the hogwash. So in this context, we're talking about business. Not really allowed to butcher your own animals and then sell what you butcher. That's usually illegal. And so if you're going to butcher your own animal, that's cool and great, but there should not be a monetary exchange through that. Otherwise, you are liable to face penalties if someone rats you out. You're just not allowed. So if you go to a custom butcher processor, right? These are people who are what we would call custom exempt, meaning they're only inspected by the county, right? They're not inspected by the state. They're not inspected by the USDA, only the county. And when a butcher or processor shop is only custom exempt, usually when you get your meat back, it will literally have a label on that says not for sale. That's just the regulations. If you're doing custom exempt, sure, you get more flexibility, but you're not allowed to actually sell that meat directly, like especially to a restaurant or something like that. Now, what you do on the sides, your business. I'm just letting you know you couldn't face penalties from the county if you are caught. So if you go to a state inspected processor facility, then you can sell your products within the state, whatever your state is. If you're USDA inspected, you go to a USDA inspected facility, then that means that you can sell your product throughout the country. And there are a lot of people who ship in multiple states as they grow their business. So that might be an option for you as well. But if we're just talking about, hey, this is just for me and my family, and that's it. No business aspect about it. Maybe they might give you a little bit of money, just says compensation, but it's not an actual money exchange. Then butchering yourself can be the best experience. It's not oftentimes the best experience depending on your skill in terms of dispatching. Hey, how are you going to pick? It's a good question. Are you going to use a bolt gun? Are you going to use a rifle? Have you done it before? That's another thing you have to consider. Normally, I tell people if you have not dispatched a pig before, then go to a butchery training, pig slaughter training classes. A lot of homesteaders are doing that more often. Sure, you might pay somewhere between $50 to maybe $500 to do the class, but just having that experience is so important because it might show you through that class that, man, I actually don't want to do this. I actually don't want to see the blood come out of the pig. That's cool. That's totally okay. Just take it to a processor and that's great. But if you are used to processing your own deer, processing your own chickens, you might be comfortable processing your own pigs as well. Pigs have a very hard skull. So you have to make sure that you get it right here with a bolt gun or with a rifle to really make sure that the pig is actually incapacitated. It doesn't actually play, it just incapacitates it because the skull is so hard. And then you just go for the jugular and bleed it out from there. Also, some people don't have the infrastructure. So do you have a big enough table? Some people like to use a gambrel. So if you're doing your own deer processing, you probably already have a gambrel. If you don't have one of those, then that's something that you might want to consider. Some people don't have enough time, especially if you're still new to processing livestock. It doesn't take long to process a deer. You can get it done in 30 minutes. But when it comes to processing a pig and having all the individual cuts for it, that can take some time. And so, do you have enough time in the day to actually go do all that work? Is one thing you want to consider. So, there are a lot of considerations in that. But again, hopefully that was helpful. Worst case scenario, always go to a class before doing it yourself, just to make sure you're actually comfortable doing it yourself.
That is great advice, and yes, I would agree. We've only ever done chickens, but I didn't go to a class, but it was a community event where the there was people who had done it many times before us, but then I can teach that now. I'm at the point where I could teach that now. Um, okay, and then Keith, we're gonna get into the feed question now. I know that's a big one, especially when we're talking about raising them for selling as an income source, because feed can be really expensive. So Keith asks, when you raise your own, what's the best feed?
Okay, so if we're again keeping the context of business, it depends. It always depends. Again, it's about your context, not me just giving you a blanket statement because it doesn't work for everybody. Generally, when we're talking about feeds, bought feeds, we have conventional, which is regular grain feed. We have non GMO. And then the step above that would be certified organic feed. Conventional is a lot cheaper than non GMO and organic. Non GMO is a lot cheaper than organic, usually 9 times out of 10. Some areas are a little different. When you look at it from that perspective, hey, you got to weigh the cost. Can you even afford to do organic or non GMO? That's a question you got to ask yourself. Usually, organic feed is around 3 to 4 times more expensive than conventional feed. So you're tripling, if not quadrupling, your feed bill, maybe even more than that, depending on where you live and how much access you have to certain varieties of feed. Some of y'all might live in remote places where just getting any kind of grain is very expensive and hard to come by on your own, especially getting it in volume. So again, generally, when we're talking about feed, with conventional feed, they didn't wash off the glyphosate or any of that stuff. So Roundup Ready is technically still on the grain as it's being processed. So for some people, that's a moral dilemma, right? For if you're selling it to a market, some people might feel iffy about that. They prefer seeing a label that says non-GMO feed fed, right? I normally do not tell people you need to go do organic, certified organic feed because the reality is non-GMO is good. It's great. And it's not nearly as expensive as organic feed. People who want organic fed pork really don't understand how expensive it is. And if you actually start charging for the worth of that pork, given what it was fed, a lot of people wouldn't even buy it. So before you start thinking about, oh, I'm going to do certified organic feed, start with non-GMO first. Make it easier on yourself. A lot of people are fine with just non-GMO. If you go organic, that's like double the price, if not triple the price. And you got to think about, how am I saving money? Or usually in pig farming, around 70 to 80% of your expenses are going to strictly be feed. So you got to think, if I'm trying to save money, feed is going to be the best option to save money, not infrastructure, not my labor. It's really always going to be feed. So think about, how can I save money on the feed aspect? You can also add in some variety like alternative feeds on top of a formulated diet. Grocery waste is a good example. Some of you guys might live near a food processing facility that might, maybe it's Dale Breads, maybe it's a guacamole factory, maybe it's an almond butter factory or facility. Maybe they're making chicken nuggets and they got discard chicken nuggets that weren't good enough for human consumption, even though a human could eat it and be perfectly fine. Work with a lot of farmers who are able to get a lot of different added on feedstuff options that allow for them to cut their costs when it comes to feed and their feed bill. So again, if you really want to be profitable, managing your feed bill is going to be the most important thing when it comes to raising pigs. Now, which type of feed you pick is totally up to you. Everyone has different moral standards. So wherever your moral standards align, perfectly okay. Just make sure you understand what kind of costs you're going to be getting if you decide to go certified organic versus non-GMO versus conventional feed. So hopefully that helps.
Yes, that is a great answer, and I love how you always answer, "It depends," because it really does depend. It's very true. We're getting some questions about pasturing pigs, foraging. What does someone need to pasture raise their pigs? How many acres? And then someone else had asked in the chat, there are people near us that have their hogs foraging on 10 acres. How long term is that type of setup? And they're in Northwest Ohio.
Again, it depends. Wisdom without the hogwash. Again, we're trying to develop critical thinking skills here. Definitely need y'all to listen. If it doesn't make sense the first time, just rewatch the playback and let it ruminate. But yeah, it depends. And here are some factors that you want to consider when thinking about if pasture systems are even right for you. First off, full disclaimer, pigs are not pasture animals. I need y'all to understand that. I'll repeat that one more time. Pigs are not pasture animals. They're not. If they were pasture animals, they would be ruminants, multiple stomachs. That way they can fully digest grass and all its availability. They're not. They're monogastrics, meaning they only have one stomach. They're similar to chickens and humans in that way. And so when you think about pigs in the wild, like the Eurasian wild boar, you're not finding it frolicking in meadows. You're not. Generally, you're going to find it in the brush, forest areas. Sure, sometimes out in open fields at nighttime. They don't like being out in the open usually as a wild animal. And generally, they suffer from heat exhaustion a lot quicker than most animals as well. So again, pigs are not pasture animals. So get that idea out of your minds. Pigs can be on pasture. They can benefit from pasture, but they don't necessarily need pasture. They actually would do probably a little bit better on the forest management system than actual pasture management system. So you can put them on the pasture temporarily, but it's not a necessity. So I hope that makes sense. So moving on from that, when it comes to how many acres should you have, it depends. How many pigs? How many pigs are you going to have? What type of pig? Some pigs are going to stay small, like the American guinea hog. They're never going to get that big. A Duroc, however, will get really big. It also depends on what type of soil you have. If you have sandy soil, the pig can root through the soil a lot quicker and a lot easier than maybe some rich, hard red clay. So understand your soil types and how animals move around. Pigs do till the earth. I don't care if you say kunis don't. I've seen kunis till the earth. They just can't do it nearly as much damage as a Duroc or Tamor for a pig that's a longer nose. That's literally it. But pigs do till. They're meant to do that. They're pigs. It's just the impact's not going to be nearly as bad. But again, if you're thinking about doing a kuni, cool, great. Kunis are great, but they take about 2 years to fully grow out. Do you have enough time for that as a business? That means your cash flow is going to be increments of 2 years. Can you sustain that for 2 years? And for a lot of people, the answer is no when it comes to selling kunis or other small breeds for pork specifically. So when you think about how many acres, think about how many pigs, what type of pig. You can have a pig, like let's say 5 pigs in a 1 acre paddock, or even a tenth of an acre paddock. 10 piglets has less impact than 10 full grown sows, right? So then that dictates how often you need to rotate your pigs through your pasture or your woodlot or whatever you might have. So when it comes to pigs being in an ecosystem, what you really want to be mindful of is the grass, is the forage opportunities. Put them in a spot, see how they react, and before they completely decimate the ground and the grass and everything, move them. And then keep doing that. My friend out in Georgia, his name is Roy Mosley of Mosley's Family Farm. He says, don't manage the pigs, manage the grass. So when you're raising pigs, even in the forest, on pasture, look at the grass, protect the grass, right? So don't let them get to a point where the grass is now nubs, shriveled up and dead, and the whole field has been tilled up all the way through. Don't wait that long. Let them graze through the grass for a couple of days, maybe even a week, depending on how much space you give them, and then move them on to the next. Again, what we're trying to develop is critical thinking skills. So what I want you to develop is what I call a farmer's eye, which is not just feed, water, and shelter, but it's the context in between all those things. It's not just doing the bare minimum, it's seeing how everything plays a role. So if you manage the grass first and move the pigs based off the grass, move the pigs based on how the land is reacting to the pigs, great. If it rains, you're going to move the pigs a lot quicker through from one paddock to the other than if it didn't rain. Part of the reason why is because pigs love mud. Pigs love wet soil. They get to just dig and play in it versus really dry ground. they can be on it a little bit longer because they're not going to literally terraform the area that they're going to be around. So again, think about your soil type, think about how many pigs you want, think about how long the pigs are going to be there, think about what breed of pig you're going to have. That dictates a lot. Also, what age the pigs are. Generally, we think in what's called animal units, which is every 1,000 pounds. Let's say you have 10 pigs at 100 pounds. Okay, that's 1,000 pounds right there. Perfect, great. But that's not the same if you had 10 full grown sows, right? The animal unit's going to be a lot larger. So try to have a consistent animal unit as you're moving pigs throughout the pastures and woodlots. And what you will find is after a year or two, you realize, oh, I understand the land really well. I even understand the land so well that I know that this particular area, I shouldn't have the pigs on for long. Or I know it's going to rain in the next couple of weeks because of just how we are. So I'll move them in a different direction because I know that part is going to get really wet and really muddy if I allow them to be on there with all that rain. So be in tune with the lands, be in tune with the grass, be in tune with the pigs, and I promise you, it will all figure itself out. Hope that.
Yeah, and that was great. I also it says Facebook user, so I'm not sure who's speaking. It might be Keith. He asked about the woods. So is the woods any different? Again, listen to the podcast episode with him on Homesteading for Beginners, podcast episode 60 and 61. I have woods, and I asked him that same question, but do you want to give a little bit insight into that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, still got. I think we're still doing pretty good on time. Yeah, with the wood system, it's even more delicate than with grass, usually. And here's the reason why. When you have an open field, all the forage that's there is getting constant sunlight, which allows for it to grow, right? That's why you can have a different field paddock be grazed on maybe even up to 3 times, maybe even up to 4 times, depending on how much rain you're going to get. Usually at least two rotations is pretty fair on average, unless you're living in a droughted area, maybe only one passing through. Usually two is pretty average a year. But in the forest, it's different. There's not a lot of sunlight growing there. So whatever forage that the pigs are eating, usually like live forage. We're talking about grasses and shrubs, small shrubs and whatever. Generally, that stuff's not going to grow back for another 6 months to a year. So you keep the pigs onto that one spot, then you want to move them and never bring them back for the rest of the year. Don't wait until the litter bed is completely eroded and washed away. That's too long. They should be disturbing the litter bed because what that inspires is it creates enough open surface area where all these little plants that otherwise wouldn't have grown because of the leaf litter will now grow. So then the next year or the next cycle, you'll start seeing all these low light plants, usually at the pig's height, that they can actually eat. A lot of them are really succulent and the pigs love it. So things I can think about are like bamboo grass, is really good and popular in North Carolina. That's a low light plant that grows really well under shade. One passing through, and after that, it's pretty much done. So again, if you're putting them through the woods, don't let them return to that same spot until the following year. On pasture, they can return usually around twice, maybe even 3 times.
Okay, good. I have a question about kudzu. Are they known for getting rid of kudzu?
Oh yeah, they love kudzu.
Okay.
They love kudzu. The thing about kudzu is they'll eat the foliage. Sometimes they'll even eat the roots if they're hungry enough for it. But generally, you want to make sure that you have a big enough population of pigs if you're looking to eradicate it. Now, I think if you have kudzu on your property, great, keep it. Like let it be there. It's a great forage for goats, great forage for because goats love broadleaf plants, great forage for pigs. They love playing in it. They love eating off of it. Kudzu also has pods, little pod seeds, and pigs love eating that as well.
Well, that's good to know. Maybe that is a reason to get pigs for
Yeah.
me.
The thing is, you want to make sure you let the pigs eat the pod seeds before they mature.
Mm,
Because if you let them eat the pod seeds after they mature, then basically they're going to be spreading more kudzu everywhere
mm,
else. So be mindful of that.
that's a good point. Okay. Next question is about if someone chooses to have a breeding farm, how do you handle the breeding process? Is it a good idea to have the boar on site or do like artificial insemination or which do you prefer? I know it depends, but what's your advice?
Yeah, it always depends. So generally, industry standard rule of thumbs is if you're going to have pigs on pasture, you usually will need at least 20 sows to justify one boar, period. I got folks like friends like Jordan Green. He has several boar pairs, so two boars. I think he had maybe four four pairs, no more than four boar pairs. So eight boars in total for the hundreds of sows that he had. So if you only got two sows, not really worth having the boar 9 times out of 10 because boars eat feed. So boars want to eat at least around 5 pounds of feed a day. Okay. You start doing the math on that, you realize it's a lot of feed. Then you start doing the math on your feed bill. You're like, that's a big bill for an animal I'm only using maybe twice out of the whole year. So is it really worth it? In a lot of cases, it's not, especially if you're still at the small homesteading level. I never recommend people getting like 20 sows their first time ever breeding. That's just silly, right? Start with one, see if you like it, then expand from two, maybe five next time, maybe 10 if you really got it down packed and you really have a passion for it. People who are breeders, they breed because they're passionate about it. If you're not passionate about breeding after doing it, maybe even once, stop. It will be miserable. It will be a thorn in your side if you keep doing it. So just say FYI, heads up on that. So I do recommend artificial insemination. Usually a lot of the state university, land grant universities will do trainings like AI trainings for pigs. And so you can, I think usually the fee for that stuff can be as low as 25 bucks, if not free, if not completely free, like as low as 25 bucks, maybe as high as 150. Again, they're not trying to make money off of those training exercises. They're just trying to create buy-in and pay for people's time. So definitely check that out. Talk to your local county extension agent, livestock agent. If you can't get an answer from them, talk to the next county over. You can also talk to your extension specialists that work directly at the universities and ask the specialist directly. Most states have a swine specialist or at the very least some type of livestock specialist, and they should be able to provide the training. And if they don't currently have it, ask for it and see if they can provide it for you and a group of other people. So yeah, advocate for yourself if you don't have the training easily available to you. There are some farmers who locally are doing their own AIing. So that's another thing. A lot of people who do show pigs, oftentimes they will AI. So maybe you don't show pig industry. I don't really like it, but they use techniques such as AI that you can learn from them. So you can ask someone who's doing show pigs and say, hey, are you doing artificial insemination? And if you are, can I learn how you do it? And that might be an option for you as well. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. I do know some people that do that, have learned how to do that. Okay, so I had one last question from somebody, and it was a mixed question, but it's basically the situation where we were in and when you were coaching me on that episode, so go check that out if you haven't listened to it, but it's a small family of 4 wanting to know whether it's best to eat pork twice a week. Like, what are the thought process that you took me through to, decide whether they need pigs or not?
Good question. Yeah, it all depends on consumption, period. There's a lot of fun with raising your own pigs, but generally, a lot of people don't realize how much meat you can get back. And that all depends on the breed. Raise a tiny breed, not going to get nearly as much meat back, nearly not as quickly as, let's say, raising a larger breed. Generally, my rule of thumb is for a lot of the larger breeds to raise them up to 300 pounds to get the most bang for your buck in terms of the time that you've used. For a Duroc, 300 pounds, a Duroc getting to 300 pounds, within 6 to 7 months, it can get there if you feed it really good. Last rolled spot can get there between 8 to 10 months at 300. A Coney, we're talking at least 3 years to get to 300 pounds. So again, how quickly do you want pork? How quickly do you crave bacon, your own bacon? So think about that. And then another thing is someone had asked about the yield that you get back from the pigs, right? So usually it's about a 50% yield. You can get more back if you're going to utilize more of the animal, including the offal, which includes kidneys, hearts, the pig head itself, bones, stuff like that. You'll get a higher yield. And then from there, you can see, okay, So with one pig, I'll get back 150 pounds, somewhere around there, of pork products. Cool, great. Do you eat that much in a year? Ask yourself that. And it just takes a little bit of mindfulness and awareness of how often you eat stuff. What I would normally recommend for people is get a lot of ground pork products. Don't flavor your pork products. You might say, well, 50 pounds of Italian sausage. Guess what? You might get to a point where you get sick and tired of Italian sausage. I'll be honest with you. You might get sick and tired of it, right? So just get the regular sausage, ground sausage, and then add your own seasonings to it. Yeah, it takes a little bit of work, extra couple of seconds to put dashes of seasoning in it, but it has so much more flexibility. So don't be pigeonholed on a specific type of flavor of ground pork products as well. So that's one thing that I would consider. But yeah, how much meat are you eating? Are you eating 5 pounds of pork a day? Are you eating 5 pounds of pork a week? Or 5 pounds of pork a month? You might get to a point where you're like, if I'm not eating 150 pounds of pork within a year, I might need to just consider working with a farmer nearby who actually is raising pigs and let them have fun. Another option might be saying, hey, you know what? I don't need to eat the whole pig because we just don't consume nearly that much pork. But I have another family. Here's where the entrepreneurship comes into my. I have another family that might be interested in pork. I can give them a certain price that helps pay for the cost of raising the pig, plus a little bit of profit on the side, right? That might be an option for you. So again, there's a lot of ways that you can finesse this. But again, the first start is to be actually aware of how much you're consuming and seeing whether or not it's worth you raising the pig outright, having someone raise it, or raising it and giving some of the meat to someone else for a little bit of money on the side.
That is great. I hope you guys are listening very closely. This is top-notch information because Pork Rhyne teaches at events like Homesteaders of America. So you guys have your personalized consulting right here. So you should be speaking of that, what is the next thing? How can people get into your world? Like how can they get your consulting services and what events are coming up for you?
Good question. I have a personal brand, Pork Rhyne, that's just for me specifically, but I also have a business brand, Educators International. And we are actually doing a free month of consultations for people who need it. If you're like, I don't know if I can afford a consultation price, cool. It's all good. We're doing it for a free month between August and September. So if you're interested in that, go to Agro Educators. That's AGRO Educators, EDUCATORS.com, and go to the We Serve section. And the first little slide that you see is going to say free consultations, summer consultations. Just put in your email. There's going to be a survey and then they'll send you directly to the sign up registration page. So yeah, if you're interested in really taking it seriously about transforming your homestead into a farmstead business, sign up, register. I'd love to help you out, have a conversation about it. If it just come, I just want to just be a homesteader. I just want to ask pick questions. Then just send me an email and I can answer stuff that way. Because I really want that to be focused on people who really want to take their business to the next level or start their business for the first time.
That's awesome. Yeah, you guys need to take advantage of that if you are very serious about this topic. And I will also link all that in the group so everyone has access to that in case they missed that information. I have one last question from Roseanne. She says, here, I'll let you read it too. I know breed depends on the situation, but what is your personal favorite breed?
Oh man, she put me on the spot. All right, okay. So for nostalgia purposes, my favorite breed is the English large black, or what we would call here the large black hog. It's near dear to my heart because it was the first breed of pig I ever raised. Was a heritage breed, and had some of the worst experiences with pigs with that one. But it created Pork Rhyne. If it wasn't for those experiences I had with that breed, and with a specific sow named Louise, which I mentioned in the previous podcast episode, definitely go check that out. I know I said that 1,000 times, but it's a good podcast episode. Go check it out. I talk more about Louise and how she really literally brought me to my knees and showed me that I really need to change what I was doing when it came to raising pigs and farming. And that moment was the birth of Pork Rhyne. Before there was Pork Rhyne as a brand or personality, Pork Rhyne was born in that moment of humility and surrender. And I'm really grateful for that. I talk more about that in the podcast episode, so go check that out.
Thank God for Louise. That
She
sounds
will.
well, this was really great. I am so thankful that you came and spoke with our members, and this group is growing pretty fast. So if you're listening to this from Pork Rhyne's YouTube channel, make sure you go to Homestead Income Plan Facebook group and you can join for free. And we have talked so far about basic general business knowledge. I taught on some foundational stuff. We have more coming up. We have Laura, coming to teach on microgreens at some point, and an Airbnb, somebody to teach on Airbnbs. And so it's good stuff. But I thank you so much, Ryan. This was just amazing training. I guess we'll see you at some other time.
Yeah, if y'all are watching on YouTube, definitely go check out Mona and her group. I vouch for her. I've already vetted her. She's good, wholesome people. She ain't trying to take your money. She ain't trying to misfeed you misinformation. Unlike some of these homesteading channels and folks. Anyways, got off the soapbox right there. But yeah, thank you for your time, Mona. Really glad to be of service to you and your community. And thanks for all the beautiful questions, audience members. This reminds me that I know a lot, but also have a lot to learn, and look forward to keep training and educating y'all.